Alrighty, we'll get going. Alrighty, cool. So I know we're at time. So thanks everybody for joining us. Springboard here for our career AMA. I'm really excited to be chatting with you all today. So we're just going to be talking about, like I said, virtual interviewing and different behavioral questions and just kind of best practices for those. That'll be super brief, and then we'll jump into your questions, which is what I'm here for today. So I'll just jump into that real quick. Alrighty. So I'll just share that, and then we will. Okay. All right, perfect. Well, again, like I said, thanks everybody for joining us. Today we'll be chatting a little bit about virtual interviewing, which I think everybody is doing at the moment. If you are doing some interviews, and then just some behavioral interview questions, and kind of more so, kind of the why behind a lot of those questions and what they're looking for. So happy to help with some of that. And this will just be real brief, so we can jump into your questions. Alrighty. So for virtual interviews, these are just some kind of top main things that you want to make sure you're thinking about, just in terms of virtual interviews. And these are more so kind of your environment and the things that you also want to make sure you're doing just in prep for when you are having to do kind of a video type interview. And a lot of these are helpful for whether it's your first interview with the company or is your second or third interview. And so one of the big things is you always want to make sure you've researched the company. I think this is something that I often find when I am prepping students with Springboard. Sometimes it's always one of those things where maybe they were so focused on the technical portions or things like that, that maybe they forgot to research the actual company itself. So really important to research the company, make sure you look at their mission statement, any recent news, especially if it's a startup, maybe if they recently raised a funding round or something like that. Also, make sure you look up the interviewer that you looked at on LinkedIn. It's not creepy or anything like that. Sometimes they kind of expect that you're going to look them up on LinkedIn. So it's good to just look at their background. Maybe if you see you have something in common with them or anything like that, always can be maybe just make the call go a little bit smoother or make you feel a little bit more, kind of feel like a little more natural kind of in the call. And then you just want to make sure you're in a quiet place as much as you can. I know with kind of shelter at home, even though I think some of that's getting eased for different locations, just make sure you're in as quiet of a place as you can be. If you are going to maybe have some noises that come out, maybe just let the person know, like, hey, my dog barks anytime somebody walks past my house, so I apologize if my dog's really loud. So you can just let them know ahead of time. And then they're usually totally fine with it. It's not a big deal, but a lot of the times it's just helpful to give people a heads up. And then just make sure you have good reception connection. I know that I've noticed, since obviously everybody's at home using their Wi-Fi, sometimes reception connection has been interrupted or in different areas, or maybe if you live somewhere with like storms and then that's trouble. And again, you could just say, hey, you know what, my internet's been a little spotty. Maybe give them your phone number in case something happens. So just make sure that you've got a backup. And then when it comes to what you're interviewing for, you want to make sure you've reviewed the job description, right? That you're really familiar with it, you know what they're looking for, and that there's, little nuanced things that you're familiar with, making sure that all your examples that you give them are really relevant. And, in terms of a virtual environment, you could maybe even like have it up in front of you to reference, while you're talking to them. Same with your resume. You could have that pulled up on your computer screen, or you could have it printed out on the side. But a lot of times it can be helpful to have it in front of you so that you're making sure you're kind of somewhat eye contact. It's maybe not actual eye contact, but trying to stare at the actual computer camera versus like looking down or all around. It's just as bad as if you're really fidgety in an interview in person, or you're shaking your leg or, things like that, maybe some nervous habits. Just really important to make sure that you're, composed and, looking them quote unquote straight in the eye, or making good eye contact in general. And then making sure that you've prepared questions. A lot of the things that can be tricky about virtual interviews is maybe you feel like you can't read people as well, or you can't see their body language as much. So making sure that, by you, if you feel like, oh, I'm worried that they won't know I'm really excited because they can't tell if I'm leaning in, or, different signs that show you're interested, making sure, by having questions prepared and asking about the team and the company and, opportunity and things like that, those are great ways to also kind of verbally show, your engagement and interest. Something really important, make sure within around 24 hours that you're sending a thank you email. It could literally be 3 sentences. Just thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you coordinating the interview. I really enjoyed chatting with you about XYZ. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hearing about next steps. It's a great way to say thank you, obviously, but then also it's a way to follow up and check in. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone, which is super helpful. With video, you want to make sure your background is like clean, or you don't have like a poster that maybe you shouldn't have behind you, or if there's a lot of people walking back and forth behind you, things like that. As much as you can diminish that, really important, just because it can be a distraction. And then in terms of, and I know with Zoom, you can have like cool backgrounds and stuff like that too. So you could play around with that. Just make sure those aren't distracting either. And then in terms of eye contact or acknowledging the other person, I know like because you're not face to face with them or in the same room, you're not able to maybe feed off the energy as much. So just making sure you're looking at the camera, like I said before. And then also, acknowledging the other person by maybe saying like nodding your head or saying, oh yeah, without interrupting them, obviously, but making sure that, you're acknowledging them. And also I just to say that too, not speaking over each other can be a little bit tricky sometimes when you're on video, right? So just making sure that, you're doing your best to be kind of respectful of not speaking over anybody or cutting someone off. So just making sure that you're aware of that and sensitive to that. So behavioral questions. I think we all kind of know what behavioral questions are. I think most of us know that tell me about yourself and what are your strengths and weaknesses are pretty common ones. But they're basically, you can tell if a behavioral question is coming on if they start with tell me about, and then it's usually tell me about a time when, or tell me about how you, or how or why you. And so a time when is they're looking for a specific example. They're not looking for you to say, oh, well, I've done that in a lot of different places. I often get that response when I ask someone, tell me about a time where you had to meet a deadline. Oh, well, I always work on deadlines, so it's something that I deal with every day. That's not a great answer. You want to give a specific example and the steps that you took to make sure that you were organized and met that deadline, things that you did in order to manage priorities. So you're showing a lot of skills, right, as you're explaining that. And you want to make sure these responses are around like a minute long. You really don't want to go too long, because if you think about most phone interviews, for the most part, especially your first interview with a recruiter, is maybe 20 to 30 minutes. So if you spend 5 minutes on any answer, that's a bulk of your interview, and then you really don't get to share a lot about yourself. So good to be mindful of those 1 to 2 minute answers. Also, most people's attention span won't go past that long. So important to make sure that your answers are concise in order to also keep the interviewer engaged. And then when it comes to like how you, so they're trying to get even more detail, right? They're trying to figure out like, okay, what skill did you use? How'd you use it? And whether it's, a soft skill or a technical skill or things like that, making sure that you're giving details of how you actually did it and what the steps were. Or if they're asking how you maybe used a programming language, give a specific example of how in your job you used that programming language, or in a project, how you used it. And then in terms of like why, a lot of companies will say, hey, why do you want to work here? Or, why are you interested in this particular role? Or, why did you take that, boot camp course? They want to know like your reasoning behind and your motivation behind either working for them or working in this industry, or working, towards, different, certifications or things like that. They want to know what motivates you and what your decision-making process is for that, because it also helps them just get to know you a little bit better, to see if maybe you'd be a good culture fit with their company in terms of what they're looking for people to be motivated to accomplish in their company. And then when answering all of these kinds of questions, really important to kind of, if you're struggling with, oh, I ramble a lot, or I have, I'm really uncomfortable answering these types of questions, thinking about the STAR method, or there's also PAR, which is just PAR, but very similar. So situation, task, action, result. So if you were to think of these as bullet points, so 4 bullet points, and say someone asked you, hey, can you tell me about a project where you used, where you had to, deal with, a lot of priorities, and how did you handle that? So what I would say is, oh, I oversee a team of 10, and, everyone's always asking me questions, and I'm not sure, it sometimes can be, tricky to make sure I'm managing everybody. So what I do is I have a weekly meeting with each person to make sure that I understand what their needs are, what their questions are, so that I can address them individually. And then every other week we have a team meeting so that we can all make sure we're communicating things, especially if anything's redundant. And then I also make sure that they are, open to sending me emails, and we have a clear communication guideline in terms of, what would be priority 1, priority 2, in terms of what they would reach out to me for. And so a specific example of that is when I had someone reach out to me that needed support with a project. And so what I did was I basically had them break down what they needed my help on in terms of what task I could help them with. And the action that I took was I reached out to my superior in order to get the resources for them to be able to complete that project. And the result was that they were able to complete the project on time and, have a great result, which also, contributed to our team really beneficially. So that's just a way to break it down. It was concise. I didn't ramble. And then you also want to make sure that you know when to stop talking. I think a lot of the times with behavioral questions, we think we need to keep saying things because the more we say, the better. That's actually the opposite. You want to make sure that you're concise and that you're very calculated with what you say, because if you say too much, sometimes that can actually work against you. So important to make sure that you're staying relevant and on topic, and that you're concise and focused in your answers. Just a little plug. I loved this quote. I was really excited to see it because I'm a big believer in thank you notes. So just in terms of this quote, not a lot of people follow up. I would say I used to go to job fairs when I was a recruiter for like a recruiting agency. So I used to have to go to a lot of job fairs. I'd meet maybe 100, 200 people in a day. And maybe 3 to 5 people would email me back or say thank you for talking to me. And I gave my business card to every single person I met. So just to let you know, if you are the person that sends follow-up messages or says thank you, you are in the minority and it's only going to help you. So just a quick plug for that. Also, it's always good to be thankful. So this is just really quick in terms of, and I know Adeniki covered this last week with, the tell me about yourself. So if you didn't get to watch that one, I would definitely encourage you to watch that video if you'd like to go more in depth with the tell me about yourself question and how to answer that more effectively. But when they ask, questions about you and your experiences, they want to know your journey. Like, can you story tell? And are you familiar with your experience, right? Like, are you able to walk them through your resume very concisely, right? Can you make it an interesting story, not like a bullet point by bullet point by bullet point kind of chronological list? That's not very exciting. So can you engage them and make your story interesting and focus on the most relevant things to them so that they're interested? Being specific, not giving vague answers is really important. What your motivators are. So like why you wanted it, why you're making a career transition, why you want to work for them, different things like that. Why do you want to work for their company, right? Being able to answer that. A really great way to start figuring out how to answer that question is look at their mission statement, look at their recent news or volunteer work, or what their company, like mission or what they stand for. Because that a lot of the times can help you find something that you connect with or that you think is, great opportunity. An example of that would be, say you're interviewing with Google and they say, hey, why do you want to work here? So a bad answer would be, oh, it's Google. everybody wants to work here, right? But a good answer would be, you know what? I used Google's job board in my search, and it was so helpful in just pulling all these resources for me that I would love to be a part of a company that helps give people that close access and like quick access to all that information, because it helped, that one little thing helped me so much in my job search, that I'd love to be a part of a company that I know is helping people on a much bigger scale gain access to information and connect them. So that's like a much more personal, and like it connects with how you connect with the company, right? And then when it comes to roles, like specific skills, that would be, technical skills, things like that, or your communication, organizational skills, or maybe if it's a management role, giving examples of your management style, your philosophy, maybe some, usually if you're looking for a hire or interviewing for a management role, they're going to ask like, hey, when have you had to have a hard conversation with somebody, or when have you had to, discipline someone, and how did you handle that? So making sure that you've got, a very kind of, it's got to be a good example. They want to know that you've had a difficult situation. It can't be like a fluff example. So important to make sure that you share that. When it comes to communication and organizational skills, they want to know like, what organizational tools do you use in your job? How do you manage your time? How do you effectively communicate with team members? Do you have meetings? Do you send emails? Do you have check-ins? Different things like that. So making sure that you're sharing the details and like steps of how you do things, not just, yes, I communicate well, because that answer actually, in fact, shows that you're not communicating well, because you're not giving them kind of what they're looking for, right? And then in terms of self-awareness, tell me about your strengths. Tell me about your weaknesses or areas of development. Tell me about a conflict resolution, or, a conflict and how you resolved it. So those things are, hey, are you aware of how you in your workspace, can work with people? So, do you know what you're good at? Do you know what you need are not good at, so that you would know to draw resources maybe, or you're trying to get better at that one thing. So you're aware of what you're good and maybe need to work on. That's really important quality. They don't want somebody that thinks they know, they're a know-it-all. But they also want someone that's confident, right? So there's that kind of catch 22 a little bit. When it comes to conflict resolution, they want to know that you're not just going to blame someone else for the problem. They want to know that you took ownership, you were accountable, and that you worked with somebody else to come to a mutual understanding. That it wasn't gossipy, or that it wasn't blaming somebody else, things like that. So just be really mindful, because those questions really help them understand, hey, would I want to work with this person? So you want to make sure that those answers are somebody that they'd want to work with. So being really mindful of that. Alrighty, cool. So I know that was just kind of quick in terms of covering behavioral questions and just kind of virtual interviewing kind of best practices. But really what I want to do is here now is jump into our questions here. So what I'm going to do real quick is pop into our questions that some of you had submitted before we got started today. So let me jump into those. And if you do have any questions for the group that's listening today, please just throw those in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer any of those questions for you. So I'm just going to pull up those questions here right now, and feel free to throw those in. I know one other pretty common question that I get with virtual interviewing is just, well, what do they want to hear, right? What does a hiring manager, what does a recruiter want to hear? And I think, the biggest thing is that they want to hear that you're confident and that you're excited, right, about what you're talking about. So I think a big part of it is, you need to believe that you can get that job, right? You need to believe you can get the job. You need to believe that you are able to contribute, that you are a good fit, that you are somebody they should hire. Because I know a lot of the times in a job search, it just gets really overwhelming, right? We can be, maybe we've had a lot of interviews or different things like that. So really important to make sure, that you're communicating that confidence, and that, if you don't think that you should get the job or that you're going to, why would they think that too, right? So you want to make sure that whatever you're selling to them is something that you'd want to buy too. So make sure that you've got that energy and that confidence, even if you have to kind of feign confidence a little bit. That's okay. Sometimes there's a little bit of a fake it till you make it mentality. I think that maybe we need to just kind of get ourselves pumped up for interviews, but really important to make sure that that confidence and assuredness is there. So quick questions here, just jumping in. There was a question for what are the best remote job boards? And we did share that actually in one of our previous AMAs. So I would encourage you to go back and look for the virtual job search. I believe that was our first AMA. So I would encourage you to go back and look on our YouTube channel for the first AMA that we had. That I think that would be super helpful for you, and that would give a lot more detail. And there's links in there too, so I'd want you to be able to see those. Okay, so then so this is a kind of a specific question, but I think it might relate to a lot of other people. So I'm not getting the kind of job I'm looking for. I am an MBA, but after that also working in I think that acronym is a bank, and I don't really like my job. So I would say some exercises that can be helpful is if, maybe you spent a lot of money and, you went to school and like spent a lot of years going after something you thought, you wanted to do. And then you're in the job and you're like, this isn't really as challenging or as interesting as I thought it was going to be. So a helpful exercise to do is kind of get a piece of paper and do kind of a crisscross. So, I have an axis. So you have 4 squares. And the first thing that you want to do is list, what do I like about my job? What do I dislike about my job? And the second one. The third one is, what do I contribute in my job? And then the fourth one is, what do I hope to contribute in my next job? And so once you look at that, then the next step would be based off of the things that you like and the things that you want to contribute in your next job. So those 2 quadrants, take those out and then figure out, is it that I, am in a management role and I don't like managing people? So maybe I should look at individual contributor roles. Does it mean that I need to switch industries? How can I do that while still leveraging my work, my schooling? Because I think an MBA is helpful in a lot of different roles. So you could apply that to a lot of different industries, especially if you're working in banking, finance. Every company deals with money. So, and nonprofits, everybody deals with money. So I would say, depending on, what satisfaction means to you, you need to define that first. What does satisfied with your job mean? And what are those things that are missing to make you not feel satisfied? Then once that's a more deep rooted question, right? So once you're able to answer that, then you can move on to, does that mean a career transition? What industries would I be, qualified to work within? How could I leverage that? What skills are missing that I would need to get into that? Do I want to invest more money in that? If you don't, what are some ways to transition into that industry with your current skills? And start having informational calls once you start to kind of develop some of those answers, because having informational calls can really kind of help get you to the next step in terms of actions that you'd need to take towards a job that hopefully you would enjoy a little more. Okay, and this next question is, what can I do to make my resume stand out as a career changer? So a big thing that's super helpful with career changing is you want to show that you are, depending on what you're transitioning careers into or changing careers into, you want to show that you have, built the skills needed to make the transition, and that you've done some either like project or volunteer work or something in order to help you apply those skills. So those are the 2 main things. You want to show you've built the new skills needed, if that was the case, and then you also want to show that you've applied them in a relevant manner towards what that job would be needed. So I would say that's the first thing. And then in terms of standing out as a career changer, you want to make sure that you're also looking at your previous job descriptions and making sure you're wording them in a way that people within the new industry or transition, career that you're going towards, that those make a little bit more sense for that industry. So kind of changing up some of the verbiage or vernacular or things like that can be helpful. So I think this one question was just what's the overall impact with COVID-19 and the job search? So I think that there's, obviously there's been some changes, but I know that there's definitely still a lot of companies hiring. My first initial thing that I recommend to people is just look at the kind of supply chain of companies and industries or services that are doing well right now, that are really busy because of COVID-19, right? This may not be the time to go work for an airline or a tourism based company, but it could be a great time to go look at, maybe if the city you live in has a headquarters for a grocery chain, or maybe, has, different delivery service type companies, online, resources for schools or companies or things like that. So a lot of those industries that are doing well right now, looking at those organizations can be super helpful. So that supply chain of, who's supporting the current economy and maybe got busier because of it. Are there opportunities for me to grow both personally and professionally? That's a great question. So I think when we think about our jobs, I think a lot of the times, maybe we're thinking about just professional growth and like our skills and things like that. But I think if you're thinking about like personal growth as well, which is awesome, because I think we spend a lot of time in our jobs, and they often can be a big part of maybe who we are. And so I think an important thing to consider there is, what kind of company culture you get into. That can either make you a happy person or a not so happy person, if you're not working for a company or people that, are, lifting you up and positive and helping you grow, right? So I think, having advocates within the company, granted, you don't have to be, best friends with everybody you work with or things like that. But I think, we've all worked for companies that have good culture and maybe not so great culture, and it definitely can stand out. And we can look back and be like, oh, wow, that was a good experience. Makes me very grateful for being at the company I am today. I know I can definitely say that. There's a lot of different opportunities, and so I think it's really important to make sure that you're at a company that aligns with your whether it's your personal and professional kind of culture like beliefs, and then in terms of having good cultural support and things like that can be really helpful to your personal and professional growth. And usually those go hand in hand. Companies that usually have a really good culture are also really invested in your growth professionally and as a person. All right, so okay. So how to craft a good LinkedIn profile. So I know that there are a lot of resources, even on LinkedIn, actually, LinkedIn Learning, and there's a few different published articles I know that you can find where people from LinkedIn like walk through, also on YouTube, walk through and like share really good advice on LinkedIn as well. The things I would make sure, just high level, is you want to make sure you have a photo that doesn't look like a selfie. So make sure, if you don't have a good one, maybe just have a friend take a head-on shot of you if you have portrait mode on your phone. I know I'm way late to the game. I just figured that out, and it looks a lot better than most of the other photos I've taken. So if you have that can be a great option, because I know I'm probably you don't need to go pay for professional headshots if you don't have them. It's not that big of a deal there. Just it's helpful to have a photo, because if you don't have a photo, sometimes they could think it's a fake profile or things like that. So really important there. Make sure you have a headline that's relevant and truthful. I know that I've actually gone on LinkedIn a few times and noticed some people having not super truthful headlines. Maybe they say that they're one thing and have never really worked in that industry or things like that. So making sure that it's okay to play the keyword game, but making sure that everything is above board. And then making sure you have an about section is really important. Also, if with location, you can either put the city that you live in. If you're planning to relocate, you will probably want to put the city that you're, even if you're not living there yet, you want to put that city. Just know that you're going to have to explain that to the recruiter or people like that. But honestly, if you don't list the city that you're looking in, then you're not going to show up in recruiter searches. But you do want to make sure that if you do get on the phone with somebody, that you're very truthful, or you put in your about section, you currently live in such and such city, looking to relocate to this city. So just make sure that that's all very clear and clearly communicated, so that there's, it's all honest and stuff there. And then you want to make sure in terms of your job descriptions and experience. I know a lot of people just list their jobs and don't put descriptions under it. You want to make sure you have at least 4 bullet points under each job, making sure that you're describing, what you contributed, your impact. Results are really important to share, having a good balance of qualitative and quantitative information if possible. You don't want to have a lot of fluff like I helped manage people. That would be very vague, right? I managed 15 people for this department and was responsible for overviewing XYZ, their performance or something kind of like that. And if you're talking about like a project or things like that you worked on, you could also, refer back to the STAR method to make sure you're explaining, the actions and tasks, actions, and results. Okay. So how to tailor your resume. So tailoring your resume, one of those things is you don't have to completely rewrite your resume for every job that you apply to. Something that can be helpful there is just to look at the skills section, if you have a summary statement, the summary statement, and then also if you have if you have like multiple projects or publications or things like that, and you want to make sure you're doing just one page, you want to make sure that you're listing the most relevant projects to that particular company, and that you're kind of, if there's any descriptions that you would need to tweak to make them a little bit more relevant or stand out a little bit more for that company, that can help. And then also just checking the skills and the summary statement. Those can be really important just to make sure you're aligning with the job's description. Obviously, though, you're not going to list things you don't have in your resume, but you want to make sure that you're kind of wording things similarly and stuff like that, and kind of just aligning with what they're looking for. And then, alrighty, so this question's a little more specific here. So this person was asking, they've got 15 years of industry experience in real estate, trying to keep it to one page. They know that in a UX design role, they need to build a unique narrative around their experience while balancing their new skills and customizing things. Is customizing each resume only keeping the content will strengthen your fit? Okay, so their question is essentially like, by customizing, and this follows to the previous question, so like by customizing your resume, is that the only thing that you can do to help like strengthen your fit for that position? So I would say no, there's additional things you can do. You can write a cover letter, if they ask for one, or if it's kind of if they offer for you to include additional kind of supplemental information. You just want to make sure the cover letter is kind of short and sweet, right? You want to make sure that it's no more than half a page. A lot of times it can be helpful to just have like a brief kind of opening paragraph with 2 or 3 bullet points of like specific skills or experiences, and then kind of a closing paragraph. That a lot of times can be a really good format. And you're focusing on the most relevant things that are going to be super eye-catching and like make you seem like the perfect candidate. Granted, not everybody reads cover letters, so you don't want to spend more than like 15-20 minutes on them. But do spell check. Please do spell check. Or Grammarly is a really good tool too. And then when it comes to other things, informational interviews with people that work in the company so that you know what they look for, and then potentially getting a referral. That's always the most beneficial thing, I would say. And then they'll also be able to point you in the right direction in terms of like how to customize and like what the company looks for and things like that. So those would just be a couple additional things that I would say that are definitely worth your time and effort when you're trying to help increase your candidacy to the company. Okay. What are some good ways to accurately portray who you are and what you have to offer to a company virtually? Okay, so that's great. So I think not all, right, like not all positions have the opportunity to share, a digital footprint, right? So not everybody has a portfolio or maybe doesn't have a website or a blog or a GitHub, like an online repository of their work or things like that. So if you don't have those things, I think sometimes it can be helpful. You have LinkedIn, so that's a great way to share kind of virtually. So that's why it's really important to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is like tip top shape, and that you're checking for spelling errors. I can tell you grammatical and spelling errors or something that I like once I saw them in a profile, I would not have the best feeling about the candidate, because I'd be like, that's such a simple thing to catch, that they could have edited and made sure wasn't in, that they caught. So I would say make sure you have like a friend or family member or something proofread your LinkedIn for you, just because a lot of times when you're having to look at a document over and over and over again, you almost glaze over simple mistakes like that, or maybe use the wrong word, like you used THERE and you meant THEIR, and spell check didn't catch it because you spelled it right. So different things like that. So just make sure with your resume, cover letter, or not really cover letters, I would just do spell check, but with your resume and with your LinkedIn profile, have somebody else look at it. But also caveat to that, there can be too many cooks in the kitchen. So, as you get advice from people on your resume, don't let it become something that you kind of obsess over. I think it's really easy for people to think that they could just spend tons and tons of time on their resume and that's going to solve all their problems. That's not the case. You should be channeling that energy to networking, and to virtual networking. That will serve your return on your investment is tenfold than what you would be if you were spending hours and hours and hours of additional time on your resume. So just quick plug again. I know I'm kind of the broken record when it comes to networking, but it's really important, and that's a big part there. And sending thank you notes after those things. Alrighty. So what's is the scope of everyday responsibilities to present? So that's a good question. So when it comes to whether you're interviewing or you're on your resume or things like that, it's how much is too much information and what's actually relevant, right? Especially if your job has a lot of soft skills, which I definitely fall in that bucket as well. Well, there are practical skills, but there can be a lot of soft skills that can be really important. Like how do you share that you have a high EQ, right? Like emotional intelligence. How do you share that, right? So you could use emotional intelligence, as a descriptor, and if that's an important thing to a job, that can be helpful. The thing that you want to make sure that you do is you don't need to go into the nitty gritty. Like if you're trying to share that you're a good communicator, make sure that you're speaking about it in terms of like business communication settings, not, oh, I'm everybody's best friend wherever I work. And, I'm really easy to talk to. That's not a relevant like thing to list. But, in terms of, I'm a great cross-functional communicator between technical and non-technical teams, which enables, me to really effectively get projects done and communicate requirements and results. That would be very relevant. So just kind of breaking it down in terms of what would be kind of most helpful there. So this question is how to get a remote job. So we have talked a little bit about that in some of the virtual job search AMAs that we've had. In terms of finding a remote job, there's a lot of different sites that are out there. And you can also, if maybe you aren't able to get a remote job or you've never worked remotely before, sometimes it can be helpful to maybe do a remote project. There's a lot of nonprofits on sites like I think it's Taproot, or there's a few. Taproot Foundation is one of them. There's also like volunteermatch.org, Catch a Fire. Those are just a few different volunteer sites. And I know that I've had, like I mentioned before, some students that are helping different nonprofits throughout the world, actually, on different types of projects. They're obviously pro bono because they're for nonprofits, but it's a great way to build kind of your repertoire and your experience while helping somebody. And then it also shows that you're capable of working on a remote project. A lot of the times companies want to see that you're able to work remotely. That helps them just build trust and confidence in your ability to do that. Because they maybe haven't met you before. So they want to kind of know that like somebody else has trusted you to do it. Just as a caveat, usually for entry-level roles, remote is a little bit trickier, just because companies usually know that you need a little bit more oversight, that you need some more mentoring, you're going to have more questions, you're just not as familiar with the landscape. So if you notice that you don't see a lot of entry-level roles for remote, that sometimes can be the case. So just to be mindful of that. And I would recommend, it's hard to have your whole entire search be 100% remote. I would say still looking at some jobs where you might have to be on site, which, I mean, everybody's kind of remote right now, unless you're obviously an essential worker. And thanks to anybody that's listening that is. But if you are looking to transition out of something like that, just being mindful that, you may start off virtually, but they eventually may want you to go into the office. Alrighty. And just as a quick reminder, I know I've gotten some of the questions in the Q&A, but if you do have any additional ones, please feel free to throw those in there. Okay, so this is a very loaded question, but I like it. So how do I find the perfect job for me? How do I apply for a job in a SMART? So it's the acronym, I think, kind of like what we talked about in one of my other AMAs, SMART way. So that's strategic, measurable, actionable, results in time bound. So how to find the perfect job for you. So it's very similar to the question that I kind of answered before, where the gentleman said he was, not really satisfied with his job, right? So I think it's helpful to break down and be like, okay, well, what have I done in the past? Because you always want to first consult your current skills that you have, right? Or experiences or industry knowledge, because that's your leverage for getting your next job. And then where's that gap? What skills do I need to get? And what do I need to do in order to help me make that transition or to make that shift? If you are not looking to make a shift and you're just like, I just don't really like where I'm at, first ask yourself, is it like, what do I care about the most? Is it the company? Is it the industry? Do I know what job titles I'd be looking for? What have I liked and disliked about previous jobs or experiences within my career? So breaking all of those things down and then kind of making, a top 10 list of, this is what I like to do, this is what I like to do, this is what I'm good at, and be realistic with that, because you obviously, there's always a little bit of a catch-22, because when you're trying to look for jobs and you're like, oh, that'd be fun, I'd love to do that, but you have no experience and none of the skills to do it, you do have to be a little bit realistic in terms of, would anybody hire me for that? So there's maybe a 0.1% chance that, somebody's open to and sees your aptitude, or maybe you have a good connection and they're willing to give you a shot. But in most cases, you're going to have to make that transition with some of the skills, or just showing some projects or experiences or things like that. So really important to make sure that you're not just looking at jobs that you think would be fun or cool, but that you're looking at jobs that would be a good match for you, would be able to leverage your previous skills, but would still enable you to grow and have new experience. Oh, I love this question. How to network to get jobs. So that's a great one. So we have a lot of resources on that as well. But in terms of networking, make sure that you have a LinkedIn profile, that you're reaching out to relevant people within the industry or jobs that you're trying to get into. Make sure you're connecting with them. There's lots of virtual like webinars like you're listening to right now, or meetups or things like that. A lot of different conferences as well have like waived their conference fees and are doing things virtually. So I would say definitely make sure you're looking at those. If it's a conference, you can look at all the speakers, try and connect with all of them on LinkedIn and find them there. If there's particular companies that you're interested in, you can go on LinkedIn, try and find 4 people per company, one technical recruiter or one technical or non-technical recruiter, 2 peer level people that are in the type of role that you're looking to get into, and then 1 manager. If you start doing that, that can help you build a really good network, pretty solid in terms of the industry and jobs that you're trying to get into. In terms of this, okay, so next question. So there are quite a few questions in terms of like so this was a great question and very relevant to today in terms of, how to properly overcome virtual interviews. So I think I gave a few examples just of how to kind of approach them, but I think, using the word overcome is a little bit different. So it kind of helps me understand a little bit about how you're viewing it. I think that I've noticed a lot of students have shared, and people have shared, with us as coaches, is that they're very draining. Having to sit, instead of doing an on-site interview in person, where you maybe go from different rooms and you have a water break, or maybe you go out to lunch with one person, so it's a little bit more mixed up. Now you're just staring at a computer and like one person after the other comes and talks to you, right? That can be really draining. So it's really important to make sure you get up, walk around. If you have like coffee or tea that you like, or water or something, make sure you have that, or a couple different things with you. Make sure you have like a snack that you can have in between calls. If you're somebody that maybe just loses, kind of your blood sugar energy, make sure you get up, walk around, go outside, maybe just breathe in some fresh air, and then walk back into the room and get some sunshine if it's sunny where you're at. Hopefully it is. And so just making sure that you have that ability to kind of break things up, maybe even do like a few jumping jacks or something in between, or run up and down stairs if you have them, just to maybe kind of get your endorphins going and your energy going if you feel like you're kind of lagging. Those are just some different things that can sometimes be helpful just to kind of overcome that, just where it feels like a little bit more intense or draining. Also, I recently they're pretty cheap on Amazon, the like blue light glasses. I don't know how much they actually work, but maybe it's a placebo effect. But also, maybe if you don't wear glasses and you notice your eyes are hurting or things like that, obviously getting away from the computer screen is the best. But if you are in those situations where you feel like maybe that's, kind of making you more tired than you normally would be if you're not used to being in front of a computer screen very much, I think those are like $10 on Amazon. So maybe that would help too. Just that's kind of more of a random one, but I don't know if that would be helpful for anybody. And then, okay, so just some additional questions here on, so what's the latest news on hiring during this season? Okay, so just in terms of, I think this would be helpful. I can explain kind of in a normal year, pandemic aside, the normal kind of like cycle of at least recruiting from what I experienced a lot is that there are kind of 2 lulls usually. So sometimes, June and July can sometimes be a little slower just because people are on vacation, but I don't think that's going to be the case now because not as many people are traveling. So I don't think hiring will actually be affected very much this summer because most people are just going to be working. They're not able to take vacations or things like that really as much. So that's kind of a bonus, I guess I would say. But usually the June and July, and then things pick up towards the end of August. September and October are usually really busy. Then as the holidays start in November, December, and early January, things are a little slower. And then things pick up end of January, February, March are very, very busy. Also, the reason that February and March end up getting really busy is because that's a lot of the times too when companies are doing interviews for internships. So the applications are usually due in December, January. They usually do the interviews in February, March, and then they've usually hired everybody by April, early May. And then the people start, in mid-July. So that a lot of the times can be the case there. And then a lot of companies hire in end of January, February, March because their new budgets have gotten approved after the beginning of the year. So that's why that period is usually pretty big. Also, the reason that the fall is usually pretty big in terms of like end of August, September, October is because they're trying to get their, they've maybe been given a certain headcount number for that year and they're trying to make sure they hire everybody, because if you don't fill all the positions you were given, then your boss is going to say, hey, I guess you don't need all those people to get everything done. So I'll give you the smaller number for next year. So people don't want that to happen. That's just one instance. That's not the case for everyone, but those are just some examples of why those particular periods of time are usually pretty busy. And that's not to say that the other periods there's no hiring, because I have tons of people get jobs in November and December, to be honest. And honestly, I have a lot of people start in the summer too. So those are just like very high level in terms of like really, really busy versus kind of busy. So I would say there's never any like just where it stops or anything like that. Because people are always getting hired all the time. No company stops operating, right? So they're always busy and moving. Alrighty, so we've just got a few minutes here. This person was asking, so this is great. After being interviewed by 2 people over Google Hangouts, I wrote one email thank you note to both. Is that appropriate? So it's definitely, I think it's okay to write one to both of them. I would say, especially if you can't get both of their emails. But often if you can write an individualized one to each person, it is nice, but that's not always the case. I know I also have a lot of people ask, hey, you know what, the person I interviewed with, I don't have their email. I just have the recruiter that I was working with's email. So it's totally okay to write a thank you note to the recruiter and say, hey, thanks for coordinating my interview with so-and-so. Do you have their email so that I could send them a thank you note? If not, here's the thank you note. If you could forward it on to them, I'd really appreciate it. So that's one way to get kind of cover your bases there too. Alrighty. All right. So this is there's kind of some additional ones on just like how to kind of job search during kind of COVID-19 and things like that. So one of the things I would say is it can be really helpful to just kind of continually set up some alerts on particular job boards. But I think the main thing is to make sure that you don't stop networking and that you're reaching out, doing informational interviews. Really important there. So just kind of another plug for that. So this question is like, what are hiring managers looking for in a candidate? Excuse me. Excuse me, apologize. So what are hiring managers looking for in a candidate in terms of qualifications, skills during COVID-19? So I don't think people's skills or things that they're looking for are changing because of COVID-19. Maybe that they're looking that you maybe have worked with virtual dispersed teams before, because you might potentially be starting as a virtual employee. That might be something, if you have done that, to highlight in your resume. I know maybe some of us have worked with, teams that are in other locations or other countries. Maybe if you're not calling that out, that might be helpful. So that would be kind of one thing, but I don't think in terms of like technical skills or things like that, that would have changed. It could be that, they're wanting people to, I know I've seen kind of in the news where some companies have been adding older technologies. I think because a lot of maybe the older systems, I saw something in the news about COBOL. So I know that was something there. Not that a lot of people want to work with that, but I've noticed that that's kind of had a little bit of a resurgence just because some old systems are built on that and they're trying to upgrade them. But predominantly most companies are looking for the newer technologies, for example, like Python or, things like that. One question was just a little bit vague, but maybe they're just starting out in their search, and they said, how do I stand out? I think some ways to positively stand out, because we can also stand out negatively too, is to stand out in a positive way is to, have a great LinkedIn profile, no spelling errors. It's really organized and clean and relevant. You've got, great examples of your work, things like that. On LinkedIn, it's also helpful to have recommendations. So if you maybe a previous boss or current coworker, things like that, you could always have them write a recommendation for you. Really important to make sure you tell them what you want them to write about, because a lot of the times I've seen recommendations where they're like, they're great, they're so nice, I loved working with them, but there's nothing specific. So it really doesn't help me learn too much about them. So maybe if they could speak about, if it was a boss, like, what kind of work you did for them, or if it's a coworker, what kind of projects you guys worked on together, and that they would recommend you for those types of projects again in the future. Different things like that is helpful. And then, having a, well done resume. I think that is really important. If you're not really sure what to do with your resume, there's some great resources from like Balanced Careers. I know Springboard's blog has some, the Muse. Those are usually resources I'll point people in the direction of. And I know Adeniki actually did a resume thing last week. So if you weren't able to view that, I would say check out our or I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, where she went through like a good resume versus a not so great resume. So that would be a great one to watch for you as well. So we've got lots of great content for you to help. And I think some additional things are, when you're networking or when you're, chatting with people or sharing your information, just making sure you have kind of, a clear elevator pitch, in terms of, hey, this is my background. This is what I'm working on right now. This is what I'm hoping to do. And, having some good questions for them. So just kind of coming across like polished and that you've thought through some of the things, so that it doesn't just seem like you want them to answer everything for you, that you're kind of coming with, somewhat of an idea of what you're hoping to get. And that also can be important there. So being a little bit organized when you are coming up to them. I noticed for me, if I can tell, somebody has at least thought through the basics, like LinkedIn, resume, what they're hoping to accomplish, or if they're not really sure what they want to do, they at least have some good questions and are looking for help and feedback. I think a great way to stand out is that, you're very open to feedback and that you are, good at listening and taking it and applying it. Is super helpful. Alrighty, so I'll just answer one more question here. And I'm gonna scroll through and kind of see if there's something specific there. So this one's in terms of, interviews. I know somebody was asking, what do I wear on a virtual interview? And I realized that's maybe one thing I didn't bring up. So the virtual interview, it's important to make sure that whatever type of industry, wear exactly what you would have worn for your on-site interview, or for your, if it was a video interview in the first place. So usually, obviously if you're in a more formal industry, maybe you would have a sport coat and like a suit and tie. But if you're in tech or like things like that, if you have a polo or, kind of a somewhat of a collared shirt, but you don't need a tie. For women, similar like what I'm wearing, like a some spring sweater, or a button up. Just for women, make sure it's nothing low. For men, or women, nothing sleeveless. Just different things like that. Just to make sure it still looks professional, even if you notice that like maybe they're all in t-shirts. You should always be dressed one level or one step above what the people that are interviewing you are wearing. Now granted, if they're already in a suit, you can't max that one out. You don't need to wear a tuxedo. But always helpful just to make sure you're polished there. And that, trying not to schedule interviews. If you're not a morning person, try not to schedule one in the morning, making sure that, you're at least trying to leverage, times of day where you're kind of at your best. Alrighty. Well, everybody, thank you so much for listening and for your time today. Thanks for joining us for all these AMAs, and hope you have a great rest of your week, and that you stay, healthy and safe during this time. And we're all thinking about you and hope you're doing well. Best of luck. Take care.